Good afternoon. I'm Roxana Colman-Herak, your host of Good Medicine today, and we're going to be talking about suicide, that taboo topic, that big pink elephant in the room. We're going to be listening to some stories that two of our guests are going to be sharing with us. Today our guest is Kim Swaney, who is a survivor of suicide, and Kayla Keplin Ridgley, who is with the Circle of Trust program. She is also a survivor of suicide and the administrative assistant for the program. So let's just jump right into this thing and acknowledge that this big pink elephant exists and maybe why it's not such a good idea to ignore its existence. Kim, tell us a little bit about you. You just recently endured a suicide. And I know suicide's always tough for anybody to have to go through. But for the sake of the audience and the viewers, what were some of the warning signs? Were there warning signs? How did the suicide kind of evolve into that final decision?
Well, it was 2 months ago that my boyfriend took his life, and there were a lot of signs. Starting off with 4 years ago, he had attempted suicide and had cut his wrist under the bridge at Polson, and some people found him, and they immediately took him to the hospital, and from there he went to the Providence Center in Missoula. At that point, we found out he was bipolar, and they had diagnosed him and put him on medication. And he continued to take that medication up until, I would say, 3-4 months before he passed away. And he was extremely irritable. He complained of chronic pain. He was severely depressed. He lost interest in a lot of things, including joy and pleasure. He alienated himself from everybody and was really, really miserable and depressed. And I tried to ask him to get help. And the more I tried, the more he resisted and locked himself in my house, refused to talk to the police, was delusional. A lot of times he was, what he thought was the truth, he believed that. And I know he was really struggling and suffering. And I think that's probably what helped me get through these last couple of months, is knowing that I know he's in a better place. I know he's not suffering. But, you know, him not staying on his medication, and that's one of the things that they say is, you know, don't stop taking your medication. It's definitely something that they will think about suicide, and him attempting that once already was bad enough. Mm-hmm. He had called me several times that day, and during one of our initial conversations it was, well, you know, I'm going to take care of this, and you know, there isn't anything you can do about it, and it may not be the outcome you want, but I'm taking care of this today. I'm done. I'm done being a bum. I'm done being a burden. And, you know, I took those as a suicide threat and called Western Montana Mental Health. I Googled different places for him, because even though we live on the reservation, he's not an Indian. And so he had limited places he could go. And I called the suicide hotline. I called 911. The cops were at my house 3 times that day, and they were unable to prevent his suicide attempt.
The individuality of suicide is kind of a predictor. There's a lot that's known about suicide, but there's a lot that's not known about suicide. And I think when there is a suicide that's committed, I think that haunting question of what could I have done, it's like you did everything within your power, accessing the resources that were available, but that choice is ultimately that individual's, and that's got to be tough on the family dynamic. I want to shift for a little bit and talk to Kayla. Kayla is also a survivor of suicide. Can you kind of tell us what led up to that final decision that you can remember?
He was an alcoholic. I think that's probably one of the biggest factors. He had a rough childhood and a lot of issues with his biological family and trying to get close to them. Mm-hmm. And I know that really bugged him a lot. And 2 years before he lost his dad. And I think just that loss and that abandonment from his biological family, but they, like his mom and them, were trying to get back in contact and they're trying to reestablish it, but there was where he felt like he wasn't good enough for them.
So often it's that person that ends up committing suicide feels like they're a burden. This is something that was kind of new and unheard of before, because a lot of people will say, that was just a really selfish act and they don't realize what they did. And while suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary situation, I sometimes question even that because of the duration. Sometimes people can be suicidal for a long period of time. What were some of the contributing factors? You kind of talked about alcohol is definitely one of the contributing factors. Was there depression in the mix with both of you?
I think so. And then also just not talking about what's really going on and trouble with like the law and feeling burdened that way.
Mm-hmm. With you, was there?
Oh yeah, listening to Kayla, my boyfriend was alcoholic, a drug addict, had a very rough childhood, was not close to his own family, was a felon, and changed his life in order to stay away from some of those those behaviors. But ultimately, he still used. He still drank. He still smoked pot.
With his medication?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. And then would blame the dry mouth and the cotton mouth on his medication, and I would try to tell him that I thought that it was counteractive to his treatment, and he would lash out. He could say really off the wall violent things, not necessarily at me, but just horrible. I just couldn't, and the things that he liked to watch were very disturbing to me. Would be consumed with death and all of, just people dying and those kinds of shows.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there is, and it's like, we gotta watch this. And just totally hated watching comedy. Didn't want to laugh. Just wanted to be angry and hostile, not necessarily to me either, not necessarily to my family, but the delusion, it just amazed me. I mean, he could get angry and be so angry that he couldn't see.
Well, let me ask you a question. Montana's #1 for completed suicides. And the statistics say that on reservations, and we only comprise 6% of the population, so we need to keep that in mind, but we're twice the national average for completed suicide. What do you think's happening in the community? Why do you think we're #1? What are some of the thoughts that come to your mind?
Isolation. And then even whenever you do reach out for help, it's not ready, or it seems like they find a reason to make it seem less of a problem, or it's not as important.
How about you?
Those are really good answers. I believe that. I believe the isolation. When we had called the cops before we went to work that morning, which was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and on our way into town, the police were on the side of the road, and I stopped, and I asked them if they were going to my house. And they said, yeah, and they were more concerned about whether or not he had established residency, the jurisdiction. Things came into play, and it was like, you need to go help him. He needs help. I need him. You need to get him out of my house. Because I was worried. I didn't know what he was capable of doing. That element of surprise, they got there and they actually got to talk to him. But that was the last time he let anybody in the house. The 2 other times that they went out there, they weren't able to reach him. He had locked himself in the house. The isolation, I don't know if there's this perception that, when you're in that frame of mind, you are not able to call for help. You are not able to even think that you need help. Your frame of mind is something else. When I spoke both with mental health and the suicide hotline, both times the people said you need to either bring them in here so we can talk to them, or you need to have them call us. He wasn't willing to do that. He didn't think he needed that kind of help. But yeah, I believe that the isolation is a big part of that, and poverty.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of factors that go along with this, and we're going to talk more about that. What are some of the warning signs? What are risk factors and some of these other elements? We're going to take a real short public service announcement break on how you can stay healthy, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Green power, do you understand it? It comes from our Earth's forces to generate future energy. The coming generations will either reap the benefits or pay the price for decisions made today. Are you willing to invest for the future? Only $3, $5, or $7 per month makes a huge difference for our children. Call 883-7900 for information. We'll leave a legacy. It's up to all of us what that legacy will be.
We are back, and we're going to continue our dialogue here. We had a little discussion during our break, and we were talking about how 200 years ago, things were pretty simple in a lot of ways. What do you think's changed? Why do you think we now are dealing with suicide and a lot of the other really tough problems that all communities are facing? What's changed?
A lot of the culture identity.
Tell me more about that.
The loss of languages, which is a really big part of who you are. and it's not, we're losing it, and trying to fight to keep it. But, it's hard because the elders are dying, and along with them is our ways that they can teach us, and we just, not enough time. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things is if you don't know your culture, then where do you really belong? Ask yourself that.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever asked yourself that?
Yeah. And I feel, because I'm still learning, and then sometimes I feel lost because it's like, well, how can I use that whenever I don't, if I'm not fully involved? And it's because I didn't live here for my whole life, and I think I use that as an excuse sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think learning that and being able to identify with your culture and who you are is a good prevention.
To have roots, some grounded roots.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Well, like I was saying earlier, and it does tie in with the having culture and spirituality. But 200 years ago, when members of the tribe or community felt that they were a burden, or that they would be better off without them, they went off and died, and it was honorable. And to this day, somewhere along the way, we start having labels. We have to categorize and put people in these categories. And unfortunately, there are laws that protect people, even those that we believe are a danger to themselves. I think that when you're really sick and you're going to die, you can't even you can't even have a doctor help you, assist you in dying, right? I mean, what do they call that?
Euthanasia or assisted
suicide. So then it's like a dirty word, and it's really a shame that people look at it that way, because I think that some of the family dynamics, again, culture, so many things have changed, and if the majority of the people that commit suicide are men, especially here, I think about how their roles have shifted, how they're no longer responsible for taking care of their family, that some of that has changed with historical trauma, them being taken away from their families, the children being taken away, and that feeling of hopelessness and the inability for men to talk about it, because I really do believe real men do cry. And
They call that cowboy bootstrap mentality, and it's like it truly is existent. And I've talked to a lot of men. My husband is the same way. He's not like a big talker. Guys don't communicate like women communicate.
mm-hmm.
We women, we talk. We tell all. There's no secrets between women. But it's really different. It is a different culture for men. It is difficult to talk, and I really hope that can change. But if we look at the hope side of all of this, we've kind of been walking down that dark hallway, which is where, unfortunately, Montana's #1 for a reason. It is a dark hallway. But how can we find that light of hope through that darkness? Where is the hope here?
I think in the education of it. When I lost Josh, I started looking at a bunch of everything and kind of overwhelmed myself. But that's why I joined the Circle of Trust program. was because I felt the education that we can provide and reach is really helpful, and then knowing there's people out there that you can talk to, or assist trainings that we're having, or the QPR trainings that can come up, because then as long as more people can identify the warning signs, even just the little ones, like just the giving away of stuff, or just the slip of the word, like, I don't belong here anymore.
So education is really important. The three things that happen with suicide is the signs are so often missed, they're dismissed, or they're avoided. And that's pretty much across the board. After someone commits suicide, it's like, oh yeah, I saw those warning signs, but I didn't know what to do. Hopefully, through education, through collaborations with a lot of different organizations, maybe we can begin to bridge some of this where there actually is more support. There are more people to talk to. Right now, we use the Suicide Lifeline number, and for those of you that don't have that number, if you're in crises, it doesn't have to just be about suicide. If you're suffering with depression, things are just not going well in your life, there are people you can talk to, and that number is 800-273-8255. And I think if there's one educational component that we can all gain some knowledge from, is that reaching out for help is a good thing, and we should all not be afraid to do that. Hopefully we can have more services that you can reach into that truly are there when you're in that time of crisis. None of us know when a crisis is going to happen. And when it does, that's why the footing so often shakes an individual. It's like when you lose your balance, it's hard to think. If we can keep our focus, it's easier to reach for what's really needed. What would be a message you would like to share with our viewing audience? We're not alone in this.
Absolutely. You know, I believe that it's okay to ask for help. And in some cases, when the person that you care about is unable or unwilling to reach out for help, have others come see them. You know, feeling like there's nothing I can do is okay, but get somebody else that can help. Get the education. The assist training is really good training for people to help understand those signs and what they can do. But above all, don't give up. Just keep trying. And love and accept the people for who they are. I think they feel so alone and unlovable.
Let's talk a little bit about the ASSIST and the QPR trainings. ASSIST trainings are what?
It's a 2-day workshop in being able to help identify and help persuade somebody to go and refer them out to where they can get help.
Okay, and that's a 2-day workshop, and I think that is like applied suicide intervention skills training. It's typically a 2-day training. What might be helpful for a lot of people who don't have 2 days that they can give up, what might be helpful is to try QPR. QPR is question, persuade, and refer. Typically it's about an hour and a half training. We do offer that through our Circle of Trust program. And that does kind of help people to recognize some of the warning signs, and I think there's even some little roles. We can't be afraid to ask someone if they're having thoughts of suicide. There's a danger when we're afraid to ask, because what it really is saying to the individual who's struggling is that you're afraid to talk about it. We can't be any more afraid to talk about this than we are talking about AIDS, talking about hepatitis, talking about STDs, talking about cancer. Somehow there's got to be a way that we can convey this message to our community. I think that's the only way we're going to be able to make a shift where we can roll out our first place into maybe fourth place. But for the last 40 or 50 years, we've been either first, second, or third place. And when you think about Wyoming and Montana right now being tied for first place, some of the things that we have in common with Wyoming, we're isolated. There's not a lot of services. They're also starting to link that there may be some correlation between elevation, that people in higher elevations aren't getting the oxygenated ions in the air that you would if you were at sea level. Having darkness for several months in the winter. Do you ever experience depression during the dark months?
Seasonal affective disorder.
What does that look like for you? What happens to you?
You want to sleep more. That's what I think about more than anything is you want to sleep more and you lose interest in doing things, isolate yourself, become very sad, and I thought that was kind of cute that they call it that.
Seasonal affect disorder, it is sad.
Yeah,
I've gone
it is
through it.
sad.
I think a lot of people do. We're getting ready to wrap up the show, but I wanted to tell you how important it is that you share your stories, that we talk about this, that this be something that maybe our community can talk about. There is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. You can't be afraid to ask for help, even though that help may seem like it's not there immediately. We have a pretty strong community. We have a lot of resources in the community, but it takes you to be able to ask for that help when you need it. I really appreciate you sharing your story, Kayla. You're wonderful. The Circle of Trust is really about just that. It's the Circle of Trust.
They are.
Be watching for the assist trainings that are offered in the community. There's no cost for these trainings. CPR trainings, we'll be offering those trainings in the community as well. If you need to reach us, the Circle of Trust program at 675-2700. Just ask for the Circle of Trust program and they'll get you. Thank you for joining us.